Hi everyone. We're going to do the review for the Paul Revere reading this way because I'm not able to be with you. And the first thing that I want to point out is that this is a slightly different map because I didn't have the right file with me when I was doing this. So we have Concord up here, Lexington here, us at WCS, we're way down here, actually further to the west over here. We have the Charles River flowing up to the north and east over here into the Back Bay and Boston Harbor. And we actually have a picture of the Old North Church, otherwise known as Christ Church back in that time. And then the actual city of Boston with the neck of Boston here. I drew it a little wider here than on your other maps. And then here's Boston Common. So if you remember, on the night of April 18, 1775, the British officials had decided that it was time to act on what they saw were rebels who were gathering ammunition and cannon and so forth over here in Concord. And they had done this many times before. This was nothing new. They were going to go out into the countryside, grab what they could of what the rebels were storing up, and then go back to their forts and so forth in Boston. But on this night, April 18, well, the afternoon, about 800 or 700 or so British soldiers started gathering here in Boston Common. And everybody knew that something was up, but they didn't know exactly where they were going to go. Meanwhile, they also sent some troops to head off the neck and some other troops to go out into the countryside to try to block Patriot spies and runners from spreading the news that something was going to happen. You had the spy network led by Joseph Warren seeing this all happen and saying, okay, what are we going to do about it? So they started meeting right here in the center of Boston and figuring out what to do. It was decided that Billy Dawes would travel this way through the neck of Boston and try to get past the British Guard and then head up towards Lexington that way. Meanwhile, Paul Revere would go to the shoreline, get in a rowboat with a couple of his friends, and try to go across that way. And another two or three guys would go to the Christ Church or Old North Church and hang some lanterns in the church's belfry to be able to tell the people of Charleston exactly what was going on. So once they figured out that the troops were gathering, Joseph Warren sent his people out, and Billy Dawes was able to get by the British line, and so he's on his way to Lexington. The guys were able to hang the lanterns up in the belfry, two of them, because the British were going to be going across by rowboat on the water. And then you also have the British starting to actually make their way across. Remember, it's about 800 guys, so it's going to take them a long time to get across on rowboats. Meanwhile, there's also a man of war, the Somerset, the big British warship right here guarding the harbor, trying to not let any Patriot spies get across. So we know the whole story about how Paul Revere forgets his spurs and the cloth to muffle the oars, supposedly, and he and his two friends somehow get across the river. So they make it across the river. The two guys in the rowboat head back. Meanwhile, Paul Revere now is in Charleston, and it's been an agreed upon thing ahead of time that he was going to get a horse. So he gets on this horse, the Larkin horse it was called, because the man who owned the horse was Mr. Larkin, and he starts running through the countryside on this horse. There's some debate as to how fast he went. When you look at paintings and stuff, it's always him galloping through the countryside and warning people the British are coming. But other people would argue that he would go much slower than that because he wanted to save the horse, and if you run the horse too hard for too long, you could risk killing the horse. So here goes Paul Revere through the countryside. And if you remember, both he and Billy Dawes was concerned because they thought the British troops were going to actually be going to Lexington because they thought both Sam Adams and John Hancock were the two guys that the British guys were after. Both of these guys were kind of the leaders of the Sons of Liberty, the Patriots, and they had committed treason, so the concerning bit was that the British soldiers might be arresting them. So around midnight or so, Paul Revere and Billy Dawes both gather at the Clark parsonage, and they are able to warn Sam Adams and John Hancock. And if you remember, John Hancock was so excited he was going to face down the British troops himself, so he starts getting his weapons ready, and his wife says, "No way, you're going to run away and be safe." In the meantime, the British soldiers have now gotten across the harbor here. They are cold and wet and nasty. It's the middle of the night, and now they have to start marching through the countryside. There's no way you can hide that many troops, so they are just going down the main road right here on the way to Lexington. Their idea was not to stop in Lexington, really, but to go through Lexington on the way to Concord. So Sam Adams, John Hancock are able to run away. There they go. They get into safety away from the British soldiers. So Paul Revere and Billy Dawes decide to keep on going. And so they start heading towards Concord just in case the British soldiers might be going that direction. So there they go. And on their way to Concord, they meet a guy named Sam Prescott. Sam Prescott had just been getting done with a date with his girlfriend in Lexington, and he's headed back to Concord. He is familiar with the countryside, so he says, "Come on, I'll lead you." While they're on their way to Concord, they're actually stopped by a group of British soldiers. Sam Prescott is the only one to get by, so he escapes and he gets to Concord. Paul Revere is actually stopped and arrested. Billy Dawes turns on his horse, and if you remember, he loses his watch on the ground, which he's going to come back several days later and find actually still on the ground, which is remarkable. And he is turned back as well. So the only one that actually gets by and gets to Concord is Sam Prescott. Meanwhile, the British soldiers, who now have Paul Revere, have this guy that they have to drag along with them. So he's kind of a bit of baggage that they have to haul along. And they hear some things going on in Lexington, because remember, they're just outside of Lexington. And they say, "Hey, what's the commotion?" And they decide they better head back to Lexington. So Paul Revere in tow, they head back to Lexington. And your reading stops right at the point where they are getting back into Lexington. In the meantime, you have Minutemen who have gathered from all the different countryside around Lexington. There's Minutemen who have gathered there from Framingham. Some Minutemen have already heard the alarm and already are starting to head over from places like Connecticut, Northbridge, Massachusetts, up by the water tower on Hill Street. There's a place where the British soldier or the Patriots gathered before they marched to Lexington and so forth. So all the Patriots are marching towards Lexington, Concord area, and we're going to get set up for a face down in Lexington between the British soldiers coming this way, the 700 or 800 or so marching this way, and the Minutemen, the few of them that have gathered here in Lexington. And it is bright early morning, and we are about to have the first shots fired and the first people die. That's about where your reading stops. Your next reading will take you to outside of Concord and into Concord and what was going on there. So if you have any other questions, write them down, keep them in your mind, and when I see you guys again in class, we can go through them.